The moment that alliance cracked wasn't loud. It wasn't announced, but it changed everything. For generations, Canada and the United States shared one of the most stable partnerships in the modern world. Their economies were intertwined, their security strategies aligned, their institutions trusted each other almost by default. It was the kind of relationship many nations hoped to replicate. Solid, predictable, enduring. Then, suddenly, predictability became a weakness. Under Donald Trump, the relationship did not slowly erode. It was deliberately put under strain. Pressure was applied by design, not by mistake. Cooperation was no longer automatic. Stability was no longer valued. And the alliance itself became a tool. Now, Canada's outgoing ambassador has said out loud what many analysts quietly concluded years ago. The old era is over. Not because it failed, but because Washington chose to move on from it. She explained that returning to the past may not even be possible. And perhaps, she suggested, that isn't entirely negative. For too long, both sides assumed the relationship would always work, no matter what. That assumption is gone now. What remains is something more complex, more cautious, and far less predictable, but still deeply connected. Today, we're breaking down the interview that exposed just how profoundly Canada-U.S. relations were reshaped and why this shift still matters far beyond North America. Donald Trump's foreign policy rested on one core belief. Calm relationships reduce leverage. He viewed stability as a disadvantage and predictability as a weakness. In his worldview, power comes from disruption, from uncertainty, from keeping allies slightly off balance. Canada was not spared. Despite decades of cooperation, Canada faced sudden tariffs, sharp public criticism, and language that would have been unthinkable in earlier administrations. These weren't isolated incidents or diplomatic missteps. They followed a consistent pattern. Apply pressure. Create uncertainty. Force recalculation. This approach wasn't emotional. It was strategic. Ambassador Hillman described how decision-making during this period became intensely centralized. Trade and diplomatic policy no longer moved through layered institutions. Instead, authority narrowed. Decisions could shift quickly, sometimes overnight. Tariffs appeared without warning. Public statements reframed negotiations in real time. Social media became a negotiating instrument. Canada was no longer responding to systems. It was responding to impulses. That imbalance mattered, because unpredictability favored the larger power. It forced faster reactions. It raised costs, and it reduced Canada's ability to plan long-term responses. Yet even within this environment, American business interests sent a clear message. Maintaining an efficient, functional trade bloc with Canada and Mexico was in the United States' own economic interest. Integrated supply chains depended on it. Industries relied on it. Jobs required it. And still, pressure continued. The most visible weapon was tariffs. Steel and aluminum duties were imposed despite Canada being one of America's most dependable suppliers. Publicly, these measures were justified on national security grounds. In practice, they acted as leverage. They increased uncertainty, strained industries, and injected political tension into Canada's domestic landscape. This wasn't routine trade policy. It was economic pressure applied for strategic effect. But economics weren't the only front. Repeated comments questioning Canada's sovereignty, suggestions that it could be absorbed, diminished, or treated as subordinate, were not accidental remarks. They functioned as signals. Signals about hierarchy. Signals about conditional respect. Signals meant to psychologically reshape negotiations before they even began. Words mattered because they reframed the relationship itself. When Ambassador Hillman says both countries once took each other for granted, she's not assigning equal blame. She's describing how stability was protected by one side and exploited by the other. Canada treated the alliance as foundational. The Trump administration treated it as flexible leverage. That difference reshaped North American politics. And it leaves one enduring question. When long-standing alliances are tested not by enemies, but by strategy, what actually holds them together? That answer may define the next chapter of Canada-U.S. relations. Canada invested in diplomacy, coordination, and institutional trust. Washington, under Donald Trump, treated that trust as leverage. The assumption was simple and dangerous. Canada's geography limited its options. Its economic integration created dependence. Its political restraint would prevent escalation. The belief was that Canada would tolerate disruption quietly to preserve stability. That assumption shaped the strategy. Trump identified predictability as weakness and used it deliberately. Stability became pressure. Cooperation became leverage. Partnership became a negotiating instrument. Tariffs were deployed not as technical trade measures, but as demonstrations of dominance. Public threats were not accidents of rhetoric. They were calculated signals. Instability was manufactured to force compliance. The message was clear. Alignment would be met with temporary calm. Resistance would be met with disruption. This was not confusion. It was intent, and it failed. Instead of yielding, Canada recalibrated. Exposure was reduced. Positions hardened. Vulnerabilities were addressed. The pressure designed to bend Canada instead reshaped it. Ambassador Hillman acknowledged that geography and history cannot be erased. People-to-people ties remain deep. Shared history still carries emotional weight. But she made one thing unmistakable. The past cannot simply be restored. And that reality, she argued, may be necessary. For too long, both countries assumed the relationship would always function on instinct alone. That assumption no longer exists. What replaces it is something more grounded, more cautious, and more deliberate. The relationship continues, but without illusions. Her interview also revealed how sharply Trump's approach unsettled American business leaders. Executives understood immediately what political theatrics ignored. Modern supply chains are integrated. Tariffs raise domestic costs first. Disruption harms competitiveness before it pressures partners. They warned policymakers repeatedly. Uncertainty would delay investment. Higher input costs would compress margins. Consumers would absorb the final cost. Growth would slow. Jobs would come under strain. Those warnings went unheard. As tariffs took effect, American companies bore the consequences. Production costs rose. Exports weakened. Prices climbed. Capital spending slowed. The pressure campaign turned inward. U.S. industry became collateral damage in a strategy aimed outward. Canada adapted. American businesses paid. The strategy underestimated Canada's institutional strength. Ottawa reinforced domestic industries. Trade partnerships expanded beyond North America. Regulatory independence was strengthened. Economic diversification accelerated. Instead of deepening dependence, Canada built resilience. Meanwhile, American firms faced higher costs and reduced global competitiveness. The effort to extract concessions triggered a structural realignment instead. Hillman emphasized that Canada's focus has now shifted decisively toward long-term self-reliance. This is not a temporary adjustment. It is a strategic reset. Canada no longer assumes political stability in Washington is guaranteed. It plans for volatility. It builds redundancy. It protects autonomy. This is not disengagement. It is strategic maturity. Trump's treatment of Canada sent a signal far beyond the border. If the United States could pressure its closest ally, no partnership was immune. Other countries took notice. Dependence was reduced. Exposure was limited. Hedging increased. As trust eroded, influence followed. Canada was among the first to adapt. Ambassador Hillman's interview confirms a central reality. The strain in Canada, U.S. relations did not emerge by chance. It was the outcome of deliberate choices. Tariffs were imposed intentionally. Rhetoric was escalated intentionally. Instability was created intentionally. The results were predictable. Canada adjusted. Canada remained credible. Canada strengthened its position. The United States weakened its own.